The gunshot that cracked through the dusty Georgetown, Colorado air wasn't what startled Zara Bennett most that scorching July afternoon in 1882. It was the sight of the tall cowboy tumbling backward off the wooden sidewalk, his arms windmilling like a child's toy as he tried to catch his balance and failed spectacularly, landing seat first in a water trough with a tremendous splash. Everyone else scattered at the sound of gunfire, but Zara stood frozen, watching this lanky stranger flail in the horse trough, his hat floating beside him like a sad brown lily pad. And when he looked up at her with water streaming down his face and said in the most earnest voice imaginable, "Well, madam, I reckon this is one way to take a bath on a Tuesday," she couldn't help herself. She laughed. Not a polite titter behind her hand like her mother had taught her, but a genuine, full-bodied laugh that came from somewhere deep in her chest, echoing down the main street of Georgetown loud enough to turn heads even after the shooter had long since fled. The cowboy's expression transformed at the sound, his embarrassment melting into something softer, warmer, like he'd just heard church bells or a favorite song from childhood. He pushed himself up from the trough, water cascading off his shoulders, his blue shirt now dark and clinging to his frame, and he just stared at her with the most peculiar look on his face, like he'd been struck by lightning and was grateful for it. "Are you hurt?" Zara managed to ask once her laughter subsided, though giggles still threatened at the corners of her mouth. She stepped closer, her sensible brown boots clicking against the wooden planks, her simple cotton dress stirring in the mountain breeze that swept down from the peaks surrounding their silver mining town. "Only my pride, miss," he said, climbing out of the trough with as much dignity as a soaking wet man could muster. He retrieved his hat, dumped the water out of it, and placed it back on his head where it sat crooked and dripping. "Name's Ryder Carson. I'd offer to shake your hand, but I seem to be somewhat waterlogged at present." "Zara Bennett," she replied, noting how his eyes, a warm brown like creek stones in sunshine, kept darting to her face as if memorizing it. "What happened? Who was shooting?" "Couple of miners having a disagreement over a claim, I suspect," Ryder said, wringing out the bottom of his shirt, which only made more water pour onto the already soaked boards beneath his feet. "I was just minding my own business, about to head into the general store when the shooting started. Turns out I'm not as quick on my feet as I thought I was when I was trying to get out of the way. I stepped backward, forgot about that trough, and well, you saw the rest." "I did," Zara said, and another small laugh escaped her. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't find it amusing. You could have been shot." "But I wasn't," Ryder said, and his smile was so genuine, so utterly lacking in wounded male pride, that Zara found herself smiling back. "And I got to hear you laugh, which I'm thinking might be the finest sound in all of Colorado territory. So really, I came out ahead in this transaction." Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the summer sun beating down on them. Men didn't usually talk to her like this, so directly, so honestly. Most of the miners and cowboys in Georgetown were either too rough or too drunk or too tired from working the silver mines that honeycombed the mountains around them. This Ryder Carson, dripping wet and earnest as a puppy, was something different entirely. "You always this forward with women you just met?" she asked, but there was no bite in her words, only curiosity. "No, madam," he said honestly. "Truth be told, I'm usually about as smooth as a burlap sack full of elbows when it comes to talking to pretty women. But something about taking an unexpected bath in a horse trough seems to have loosened my tongue. Maybe I should do it more often." "I wouldn't recommend it," Zara said. "The horses wouldn't appreciate it, and neither would your health come winter." "Valid points, both," Ryder agreed. He squeezed more water from his sleeves. "Say, I don't suppose you know where a fellow might dry off around here. I'm somewhat new to Georgetown, Just came up from Denver 3 days ago to work at the Lancaster mine." "You're a miner?" Zara asked, surprised. He didn't have the look of most miners she knew, those men who spent their days in the dark belly of the mountains, emerging gray-faced and coughing. Ryder looked like he belonged under open sky, like he'd be more at home on horseback than holding a pickaxe. "Not exactly," he admitted. "I'm a surveyor. The mining company hired me to map out some of their newer tunnels, make sure they're not going to collapse on anybody's head. It's technical work, needs someone who can read the rock and understand the mathematics of it all. I've got education from back east, Pennsylvania, but I prefer the West. Too much civilization back there for my liking." "A surveyor," Zara repeated, impressed despite herself. Education wasn't common out here, and mathematical skill even less so. Most of the men in Georgetown could barely write their own names. "That's quite a profession." "It keeps me occupied," Ryder said modestly. "Though right now, I'm more concerned with not catching my death of cold. These mountain afternoons might be warm, but I'm standing in a breeze that's coming straight off the snowpack, and I can feel it through these wet clothes." Zara made a decision then, one that surprised her even as she made it. "My father runs the boarding house 2 streets over. Mrs. Fletcher next door takes in laundry and mending. If you come with me, we can get you some dry clothes while yours are being wrung out and hung to dry. Father won't mind. He's always looking for new boarders, and if you're working at the Lancaster, you'll need a place to stay that's closer than the mining camp." Ryder's face brightened like sunrise over the peaks. "That's mighty kind of you, Miss Bennett. I'm currently sleeping in a tent up at the camp, and I won't lie, a real bed would be a welcome change. The ground up there is harder than algebra and twice as unforgiving." They walked together through Georgetown's busy streets, Ryder leaving a trail of water droplets behind him like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale. The town was built along Clear Creek, nestled in a narrow valley with mountains rising steep on either side. Silver had been discovered here 20 years earlier, and the town had boomed from nothing to a population of several thousand almost overnight. The main street was lined with false-fronted buildings, their fresh paint a testament to the wealth flowing from the mines. Saloons stood next to assay offices, which stood next to respectable establishments like her father's boarding house and the various mercantiles that served the population. "You've lived here long?" Ryder asked as they walked, nodding politely to the people they passed, most of whom stared at his waterlogged state with varying degrees of amusement or concern. "All my life," Zara replied. "My father came here in '63 during the first rush. He tried his hand at mining, decided he had no talent for it, and opened the boarding house instead. He said he'd rather make his fortune feeding miners than being one. Mother passed when I was 12, so it's just been the 2 of us running the place since then." "I'm sorry about your mother," Ryder said, and the way he said it made Zara believe he truly meant it. "Thank you. It was 8 years ago now, but some days it feels like yesterday." She paused, surprised at herself for sharing something so personal with a stranger. But Ryder Carson didn't feel like a stranger somehow. Maybe it was the way he'd handled his embarrassing tumble with such good humor, or maybe it was something else, something indefinable that drew her to him. "Here we are." The boarding house was a substantial 2-story structure, one of the nicer buildings in Georgetown, painted white with green trim and a wide porch that wrapped around the front and side. A hand-painted sign reading Bennett's Boarding House hung above the door, swaying gently in the breeze. "Looks like a fine establishment," Ryder observed. "We keep it clean and the food is good," Zara said with a note of pride. "Father's particular about who he rents to. No troublemakers, no drunkards, no one who can't pay their rent on time." "I can promise I'm none of those things," Ryder said. "Though I should warn you, I do occasionally fall into horse troughs." That startled another laugh out of Zara, and she saw Ryder's expression brighten again at the sound. There was something almost hungry in the way he looked at her when she laughed, like he was memorizing it, storing it away for safekeeping. Inside, the boarding house was cool and dim after the bright street. The main room served as a sitting area, with comfortable if worn furniture arranged around a large stone fireplace. The smell of fresh bread drifted from somewhere deeper in the house, and Zara could hear her father moving around in the kitchen, probably preparing for the evening meal. "Father," she called out, "we have a potential boarder." Thomas Bennett emerged from the kitchen, wiping his flour-dusted hands on his apron. He was a solid man in his early 50s, with gray threading through his dark hair and sharp eyes that missed little. Those eyes took in Ryder's waterlogged state with one sweeping glance. "Fell in the creek, did you?" he asked without preamble. "Horse trough, actually," Ryder replied, and launched into an explanation of the shooting and his ungraceful backward tumble. Thomas listened, his expression giving nothing away, but Zara saw the corner of his mouth twitch when Ryder got to the part about his hat floating like a lily pad. "Well, can't fault a man for bad luck," Thomas said when Ryder finished. "I'm Thomas Bennett, as you've probably guessed. You're looking for a room. If you've got one available, sir. I'm working as a surveyor for the Lancaster mine, steady employment, and I can pay first and last month upfront if that suits you." Thomas's eyebrows rose slightly. Upfront payment wasn't common. Most miners lived hand to mouth, spending their wages as fast as they earned them. "That's a generous offer. Let's get you dried off first and then we can discuss terms. Zara, take him up to the blue room, it's empty. I'll fetch some clothes that might fit him from the lost and found box." Previous boarder left them behind when he moved to Leadville. The blue room was on the second floor, small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, a wardrobe, and a single window overlooking the street. Zara showed Ryder inside, suddenly aware of the impropriety of being alone with him in a bedroom, even with her father downstairs. "I'll wait in the hall while you change," she said quickly. "Father will be up in a moment with those clothes." "Miss Bennett," Ryder said, and something in his tone made her pause at the door and turn back. "I know we just met, and I know this is going to sound strange, but I have to say it. When you laughed out there on the street, at my clumsy fall and my even clumsier joke, it was like hearing music for the first time. And I know that sounds ridiculous. I know I sound like a fool, but I've been traveling around the West for 5 years now, and I've never heard anything quite like it." "Quite like you." Zara's breath caught in her throat. She should have been offended, or at least put off by such forward talk from a man she'd known for less than an hour. But she wasn't. Instead, her heart was beating faster, and she felt something unfurling in her chest, something warm and bright and entirely unexpected. "That's not ridiculous," she heard herself say. "Or if it is, then I suppose I'm a fool too, because I haven't been able to stop smiling since I met you." The smile that broke across Ryder's face was like dawn breaking over the mountains, and Zara felt herself smiling back just as wide. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, until Thomas's footsteps on the stairs broke the spell. "Here we go," Thomas said, appearing in the doorway with an armful of clothes. "They might be a bit loose. The previous owner was a stockier fellow, but they're clean and dry. Get yourself changed and come down to the kitchen. I've got coffee on and we can discuss terms." Over coffee and fresh bread with butter, Ryder and Thomas negotiated the rental agreement. Zara busied herself with kitchen tasks, but she was acutely aware of Ryder's presence at the table, the way he spoke respectfully to her father, the way his eyes kept finding her across the room. The borrowed clothes were indeed too big, hanging loose on his tall, lean frame, but he'd rolled up the sleeves and managed to make even that look somehow endearing. "So you're from Pennsylvania originally?" Thomas asked, leaning back in his chair. "Yes, sir, Philadelphia. My father was a professor of mathematics at the university there. He wanted me to follow in his footsteps, but I've always had wanderlust in my blood. The West called to me, all this open space, these mountains, the sense that everything's still being figured out. So I got my education, learned surveying, and headed out here as soon as I could." "Your family must miss you," Zara said, bringing the coffee pot over to refill their cups. "My parents passed a few years back, influenza," Ryder said quietly. "I've got a sister back east, married to a banker, but we're not close. She thinks I'm wasting my education out here in what she calls the wilderness. I wrote her about Georgetown, and she wrote back asking if we have indoor plumbing yet." He grinned. "I told her we do, and she seemed disappointed, like she wanted to believe I was living in complete squalor." Thomas chuckled at that. "We're quite civilized here, despite what the East might think. We've got churches, schools, a lending library, even an opera house. The silver brings in enough money to keep things respectable." "I've noticed," Ryder said. "It's part of why I wanted to settle here rather than in some of the rougher camps. I've spent enough time in places where a man's not safe walking down the street after dark. Georgetown seems different." "We try to keep it that way," Thomas agreed. "Though we get our share of trouble, like those shooters today. Mining disputes, claim jumping, that sort of thing. But overall, we've got law and order, and most people are decent folk just trying to make a living." They talked for another hour, covering everything from the best places to buy supplies to the schedule of church services, to which saloons were relatively safe, and which ones to avoid entirely. Zara learned that Ryder could play the harmonica, that he preferred coffee to tea, that he'd once surveyed a railroad line through the Rocky Mountains and had nearly frozen to death doing it. She learned that he had a way of listening when people talked, really listening, like what they were saying mattered to him. And she learned that every time she spoke, his attention focused on her completely, like she was the most interesting person in the room. By the time Ryder's own clothes had been washed and dried by Mrs. Fletcher and returned to the boarding house, the sun was setting behind the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple that made the whole valley glow. Ryder had officially moved into the blue room, unpacking his few belongings from the saddlebags he'd retrieved from the livery stable where he'd boarded his horse. That evening, Zara served dinner to the boarding house residents. There were 6 other boarders currently in residence: 2 minors, a shopkeeper, a widow who worked as a seamstress, and a young couple who'd come to Georgetown hoping to start a freight business. They all gathered around the long table in the dining room, and Zara brought out platters of roasted chicken, potatoes, carrots, and more of that fresh bread. Ryder fit into the group easily, answering questions about his work and asking questions in return, showing genuine interest in the other boarders' lives. "So you're the fellow who fell in the horse trough," one of the miners said with a grin, a grizzled man named Pete who'd been boarding with them for 2 years. "Heard about that. The whole town's talking about it." "News travels fast," Ryder said good-naturedly. "Yes, that was me. In my defense, I was dodging bullets." "And he landed with quite a splash," Zara added, unable to help herself, and the whole table laughed. Ryder caught her eye and winked, and she felt that warm flutter in her chest again. After dinner, while Zara washed dishes and her father smoked his pipe on the porch, Ryder appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Can I help?" he asked. "You don't have to," Zara said, up to her elbows in soapy water. You're a paying guest. Maybe so, but my mother raised me to never leave a woman to clean up alone if I can help. Please, let me dry while you wash. So they worked together in the kitchen, Zara washing and Ryder drying, falling into an easy rhythm. The kitchen was warm from the stove, and the evening light coming through the window turned everything golden. They talked about small things, inconsequential things, but underneath the words was something else, something neither of them was quite ready to name yet. "Can I ask you something?" Ryder said as he dried the last plate and set it in the cupboard. "Of course. That laugh of yours when you saw me in the trough. Do you laugh like that often? So free and joyful?" Zara paused, her hands stilling in the dishwater. "No," she admitted quietly. "Not as much as I used to. After Mother died, Father and we just focused on survival, on keeping the boarding house running. There wasn't much room for laughter. And most of the men in this town, they're not really looking for someone to laugh with. They're looking for someone to cook their meals and mend their clothes and not ask too many questions." "That's a lonely way to live," Ryder said softly. "It is," Zara agreed, and realized she'd never admitted that to anyone before, not even to herself. "But it's the way things are. I'm 20 years old, and most women my age are already married with children. But I never met anyone who made me want to change my life. Never met anyone who seemed to understand that I'm more than just a pair of hands to keep house." "You are so much more than that," Ryder said with such conviction that Zara looked up at him, startled. "I've known you for less than a day, and I can already see that. You've got spirit, Miss Bennett. You've got this light in you, this joy that comes through even when you're talking about hard things. That's rare, that's precious. You see all that, do you?" Zara asked, trying to keep her tone light even though her heart was hammering. "I do," Ryder said simply. "And I'd like to get to know you better if you'll let me. I know I'm just some fool who falls into horse troughs, but I'd count it an honor to spend more time with you." Zara dried her hands on her apron, buying herself a moment to think. This was happening so fast, too fast by any reasonable standard. But when had matters of the heart ever been reasonable? And there was something about Ryder Carson that made her want to throw reason to the wind. "I'd like that too," she said finally, and watched his face light up like she'd just given him the greatest gift imaginable. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and stolen moments. Ryder's days were spent at the Lancaster mine, mapping tunnels and consulting with the engineers about expansion plans. Zara's days were filled with the endless tasks of running a boarding house, cooking and cleaning and managing supplies. But in the early mornings before Ryder left for the mine, they'd share coffee on the porch, watching Georgetown wake up. In the evenings, after dinner was cleared and dishes were done, they'd walk together through town, Ryder pointing out constellations he'd learned to navigate by during his surveying trips, Zara showing him the best spots to watch the sunset paint the mountains. Thomas watched this courtship develop with a careful eye, but he didn't interfere. Zara caught him studying Ryder sometimes, taking his measure, but whatever he saw must have satisfied him, because he never said a discouraging word. In fact, he seemed to approve, even going so far as to invite Ryder to join him for morning coffee and strategy talks about the boarding house business. "Your father's a good man," Ryder said one evening as he and Zara sat on the porch steps, the August night warm and full of stars. "He could have sent me packing that first day, strange wet man appearing with his daughter, but he gave me a chance." "He's a good judge of character," Zara replied. "And he likes you. He doesn't say it, but I can tell. He actually talks to you like you're a person, not just a boarder. That's rare for him. Well, I like him too, and I'm grateful he's letting me court his daughter." Ryder reached over and took her hand, his fingers warm and calloused against hers. Because I am courting you, Zara. I want to be clear about my intentions. I know we haven't known each other long, but everything in me says you're something special. You're someone I could build a life with." Zara's breath caught. She'd hoped, of course, but hearing him say it so plainly made it real. "I feel the same way," she admitted. "It's strange, isn't it? How fast this has happened. I keep thinking I should be more cautious, more sensible, but I can't seem to manage it where you're concerned." "I don't think love is sensible," Ryder said, and there was the word, hanging in the air between them like a soap bubble, fragile and perfect. "I think it's terrifying and wonderful and completely illogical, and I think I'm falling into it head first, just like I fell into that horse trough." Zara laughed, that same free, joyful laugh that had captured Ryder's heart that first day, and leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then I suppose we're both falling," she said. "And I can't think of anyone I'd rather fall with." They sat there for a long time, hand in hand, watching the stars wheel overhead and listening to the creek burble past at the edge of town. It was one of those perfect moments that Zara knew she'd remember for the rest of her life, no matter what came after. What came after, as it turned out, was a crisis. It started with a cave-in at the Lancaster mine. Ryder had been deep in the tunnels, surveying a new shaft when part of the ceiling collapsed. 3 miners were trapped, and Ryder, who'd been just outside the affected area, immediately sprang into action. He spent the next 18 hours helping to dig out the trapped men, using his knowledge of the tunnel structure to guide the rescue efforts. By the time all 3 miners were pulled out alive, Ryder was covered head to toe in rock dust and exhausted beyond measure, but whole. Zara heard about it from Pete, who came rushing back to the boarding house with the news. Her heart had stopped when he said there'd been a cave-in, and started again only when he assured her that Ryder was alive and unhurt. She was standing on the porch when Ryder finally made it back, stumbling with exhaustion, and she flew down the steps to meet him. "You're all right," she said, running her hands over his arms, his chest, checking for injuries even though Pete had said he was fine. "I'm all right," Ryder confirmed, pulling her into an embrace despite the rock dust covering him. "Just tired. It was close, Zara. Another few minutes and those men would have suffocated. We got them out just in time." "Thank God," Zara breathed against his chest. "When Pete said there'd been a cave-in, I thought, I was so afraid." "Hey," Ryder said gently, pulling back to look at her face. "Hey, I'm okay. I'm right here." "I know, but it made me realize," Zara said, and her voice was shaking. "It made me realize how dangerous your work is. How easily I could lose you before we've even really had a chance. And I can't, Ryder, I can't lose you." "You won't," he promised, cradling her face in his dusty hands. "I'm not going anywhere. Today was unusual. Cave-ins don't happen often, especially not with me in the mine. Most of my work is above ground, you know that. But it could happen again," Zara insisted. "Any day it could happen." "Then we shouldn't waste the days we have," Ryder said seriously. "Zara, I was going to wait, going to do this properly with flowers and a speech, but standing here now, covered in dust and grateful to be alive, I can't wait any more. I love you. I've loved you since the moment you laughed at me in that horse trough. Will you marry me?" Zara's eyes went wide. "What? Marry me?" Ryder repeated. "I know it's fast, I know people will talk, but I don't care about any of that. Life's too short and too uncertain. I want to spend whatever time I have with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want to hear that laugh of yours every single day for the rest of my life. So please, Zara Bennett, will you marry me?" "Yes," Zara said without hesitation. "Yes, of course, yes." Ryder let out a whoop of joy and spun her around right there on the front lawn, both of them laughing, and Zara didn't even care that he was getting rock dust all over her dress. They were still spinning when Thomas came out onto the porch to see what the commotion was about. "I'm marrying your daughter, sir," Ryder announced, setting Zara back on her feet but keeping his arm around her waist. "Just asked her, and she said yes. I know I should have asked your permission first, and I apologize for that, but the words just came out and I meant every one of them." Thomas looked at them both, at their dusty, joyful faces, at the way they leaned into each other like two trees that had grown together, and his stern expression softened. "Well, I suppose if Zara said yes, then you have my blessing too. Though next time, son, maybe propose when you're not covered in half the mountain." "Yes, sir," Ryder agreed, grinning. "I'll remember that for next time." "There won't be a next time," Zara said firmly. "One proposal is quite enough, thank you." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church at the north end of Georgetown, with the whole town turning out for the celebration. Zara wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in tissue paper for 8 years, and carried wildflowers that Ryder had picked himself from the high meadows above town. Thomas walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, and when the preacher asked if anyone objected to the union, Pete the miner shouted out, "Only if he's planning to fall into any more horse troughs," which made the whole congregation laugh, including Ryder and Zara. Their first home was a small house on the eastern edge of town, a 2-room cabin that needed work but had good bones and a spectacular view of the mountains. Ryder bought it with his savings, and they spent their first weeks of marriage fixing it up together, painting walls and mending the roof and building furniture from pine boards. Thomas gave them dishes and linens from the boarding house, and the other boarders chipped in with various household goods, so that by the end of September, their little cabin felt like a real home. Zara continued to help her father at the boarding house most days, but now she came home to her own place in the evenings, to her own husband, and the novelty of it never quite wore off. Ryder would return from the mine and they'd cook dinner together, talking about their days, and then they'd sit on their little porch and watch the sun set behind the peaks, hand in hand, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing together in comfortable silence. Happy. Ryder would ask and Zara would always answer, gloriously. Their first winter together was harsh, as mountain winters always were. Snow piled up higher than the windows, and the temperature dropped so low that water froze solid in pipes. But their little cabin stayed warm, and they stayed warm in it, and Zara learned that winter could be beautiful when you had someone to share it with. Ryder taught her to read the snow, to see the different kinds, and know what they meant for travel and safety. She taught him to make her mother's recipes, the ones that turned simple ingredients into meals that felt like coming home. In February, during a particularly fierce blizzard that kept Ryder home from the mine for 3 days, Zara realized she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but hadn't been certain until the nausea started and wouldn't stop. She told Ryder on the second evening of the storm as they sat by the fire and listened to the wind howl outside. "I'm going to have a baby," she said simply, watching his face. Ryder went very still, his eyes widening. "A baby? You're certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor, and I'll do that once the storm clears." "A baby," Ryder repeated, and then a smile broke across his face like sunrise. "We're going to have a baby. Zara, that's wonderful." I don't even have words for what that is." "Terrifying," Zara suggested, "because I'm quite terrified." "Well, yes, that too," Ryder admitted, "but also wonderful, mostly wonderful. We're going to be parents." He pulled her into his arms, holding her gently like she might break, and Zara felt some of her fear ease. They would figure this out together, just like they'd figured out everything else. The doctor confirmed the pregnancy a week later, dating it to November, which meant the baby would come in late summer. Thomas was delighted at the news of becoming a grandfather, immediately starting to plan a nursery in the guest room of the cabin. The boarding house residents threw them a surprise celebration, complete with cake and badly wrapped gifts. Mrs. Fletcher, the laundry woman who dried Ryder's clothes that first day, knitted a set of impossibly tiny booties and pressed them into Zara's hands with tears in her eyes. Spring came slowly to the mountains that year, the snow receding inch by inch, revealing the brown grass and waiting earth beneath. As the world warmed and greened, Zara's belly grew, and with it came a new kind of joy. Ryder would talk to the baby through her skin, telling ridiculous stories and singing songs he made up on the spot. And Zara would laugh and laugh, her whole body shaking with it, and the baby would kick as if joining in the amusement. "This child is going to have your sense of humor," Zara told Ryder one evening in May, as they walked slowly up the hill behind their cabin, taking in the sunset. "Which means our house is going to be full of terrible jokes and laughter for the next 18 years. "Longer than that, I hope," Ryder said, his hand resting on her belly, feeling the baby move beneath his palm. "I plan on making terrible jokes until I'm 90, and I plan on laughing at them," Zara replied, "even though I probably shouldn't encourage you. Too late, you already married me. You're stuck with me now." "Good," Zara said simply, and meant it with her whole heart. But spring also brought trouble to Georgetown, the kind of trouble that had been brewing beneath the surface all winter. There was dispute over a particularly rich silver vein that ran beneath several claims. Multiple mine owners claimed rights to it, and tempers were running hot. The Lancaster mine, where Ryder worked, was right in the middle of the controversy. The mine owner, a man named Gregory Lancaster, was adamant that the vein was his by right, and he had the surveys to prove it. But the owner of the adjacent mine, the Paradise, claimed the same thing. Ryder found himself caught in the middle, his survey work being used as evidence by both sides. He spent hours going over his maps, double-checking his calculations, trying to determine the truth of the matter. But the deeper he dug, the more complicated it became. The vein twisted and turned beneath the mountain in ways that made ownership genuinely unclear. "I can't give them the answer they want," Ryder told Zara one night, frustrated and exhausted, "because there isn't a clean answer. The vein runs beneath both properties. They should share the profits, work together to mine it, but neither owner wants to hear that. They both want it all." "What will you do?" Zara asked, her hand resting on her very pregnant belly. She was due in 6 weeks, and the baby seemed to know it, moving constantly, preparing for arrival. "Tell the truth," Ryder said simply. "It's all I can do. I'll present my findings to both owners and let the courts sort it out if they must. But I won't lie or fudge the numbers to benefit either side." The meeting was set for the first week of July, to be held in the office of Georgetown's mayor, with both mine owners, their lawyers, and Ryder in attendance. Zara wanted to go with him to support him, but she was too pregnant to move comfortably anymore, and Ryder insisted she stay home and rest. "This is business," he said, kissing her forehead before he left that morning. "Boring legal business. I'll be home by supper and tell you all about it." But he wasn't home by supper. Supper came and went, the sun set and still no Ryder. Zara tried not to worry, telling herself the meeting had simply run long, but as full dark fell and he still hadn't appeared, fear started to gnaw at her. She was about to head to her father's boarding house to ask for help when the door finally opened and Ryder walked in. Except he didn't walk so much as stumble, and in the lamplight, Zara could see his lip was split and bleeding, his left eye already swelling shut, and his shirt torn. "What happened?" she gasped, rushing to him as fast as her pregnant body would allow. "Nothing good," Ryder said grimly, sinking into a chair and accepting the wet cloth she pressed to his face. I presented my findings, showed them the survey data, explained that the vein runs beneath both properties. Lancaster took it badly, accused me of being bought by Paradise. His foreman, big fellow named Cutter, decided to convince me to change my story. Followed me out of the mayor's office and made his case with his fists. He attacked you. Zara felt fury rise in her chest, hot and fierce. That's assault. Did anyone see? Can you press charges? It was in an alley conveniently empty of witnesses, Ryder said tiredly. And even if I could prove it, what good would it do? Lancaster has half the town in his pocket. No judge would convict his foreman. It would just make things worse. So he gets away with it. Zara couldn't keep the anger out of her voice. That's not right. No, it's not, Ryder agreed. But it's the way things are, especially when money's involved. A rich man can get away with a lot out here. What about the Paradise owner? Zara asked, gently dabbing at the cut on his lip. Is he on your side? Marcus Wheeler. He seemed satisfied with my findings, said he'd suspected as much. But he's also not interested in sharing either. He wants to take Lancaster to court, try to claim the whole vein. It's going to be a mess, Zara. A legal battle that could last years. And where does that leave you? Ryder sighed. Probably out of a job. Lancaster fired me on the spot, said he didn't need a surveyor who couldn't do simple mathematics. Which is ironic, since my mathematics are exactly why he's upset. Wheeler offered me work, but I'd be walking into the same situation from the other side. I'm thinking it might be time to look for survey work elsewhere, maybe with the railroad or one of the other mining companies that isn't involved in this dispute. Zara set down the cloth and took his hand, bruised knuckles and all. We'll figure it out, she said firmly. You did the right thing telling the truth. Don't doubt that. I know, Ryder said. But doing the right thing doesn't always pay the bills or keep my wife and soon-to-be child safe. If Lancaster's mad enough to have me beaten, who knows what else he might do? That fear proved prophetic. 3 days later, someone threw a rock through their window in the middle of the night. The glass shattered inward, spraying across their bedroom floor, and tied around the rock was a note that said simply, "Leave Georgetown." Ryder reported it to the sheriff, but nothing came of it. No one had seen anything, and there was no proof of who'd done it. The sheriff, a man named Collins who everyone knew took money from Lancaster, suggested that maybe Ryder should take the note's advice, that Georgetown might not be healthy for him right now. He's threatening us, Zara said, furious after the sheriff left. That's what he's doing, threatening us in our own home. I know, Ryder said quietly. He was sweeping up the glass, his movements careful and methodical. And I hate that you're in the middle of this. You're going to have our baby in a few weeks. You should be safe and calm, not dealing with broken windows and threats. This isn't your fault, Zara insisted. Isn't it? If I just told Lancaster what he wanted to hear, none of this would be happening. And you'd have to live with having lied, with having compromised everything you believe in. That's not the man I married, Ryder. I married a man who stands by his principles, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Ryder set down the broom and came to her, wrapping his arms around her carefully, mindful of her belly between them. I don't deserve you, he said into her hair. Yes, you do, Zara replied. And we're going to get through this. We've gotten through everything else. But the campaign of intimidation didn't stop. Over the next 2 weeks, they found their horse spooked and loose from the stable twice, found more threatening notes, found a dead rat nailed to their door. Each incident was small enough that the sheriff dismissed it as coincidence or pranks, but the pattern was clear. Someone wanted them gone, and that someone was getting bolder. Thomas was ready to take his rifle and march down to the Lancaster mine himself, and Ryder had to physically restrain him. "That's exactly what they want," Ryder said. "An excuse to claim we started something. We can't give them that." "So we just sit here and take it?" Thomas demanded. "No," Ryder said. "We're smart about it. I've been making inquiries. There's a railroad surveying job in Denver. Good money, respectable work. We could move there, start fresh. Get away from all this mess." "Run away, you mean," Thomas said flatly. "Strategically relocate," Ryder corrected. "There's no shame in leaving a bad situation, especially when I have a wife and child to think about. And what happens to your reputation when word gets out that you ran? You think other companies won't hear about this? The mining world is smaller than you think, son. If you run now, it'll follow you." That gave Ryder pause because Thomas was right. The mining and surveying community was tight-knit, and news traveled fast. If he left Georgetown under a cloud, future employers might think twice about hiring him. They were still debating what to do when Zara went into labor, 3 weeks earlier than expected, brought on possibly by the stress of the constant threats. It was the middle of the afternoon, and Ryder was at their cabin, having taken to working from home to keep Zara safe. One moment she was making bread, and the next her water broke in a rush across the kitchen floor. "All right," Ryder said, going into the calm mode that came over him in emergencies. "All right, this is happening. I'm going to get Mrs. Fletcher and the midwife. You sit down, don't move, I'll be right back." "Ryder," Zara gasped as the first contraction hit. "It's early." "I know, but babies come when they want to come. You're going to be fine. Both of you are going to be fine." He kissed her quickly, grabbed his coat, and ran. He was back within 20 minutes with Mrs. Fletcher, who immediately took charge with the no-nonsense efficiency of a woman who'd birthed 7 children of her own. The midwife, a capable woman named Sarah who delivered half the babies in Georgetown, arrived shortly after. They shooed Ryder out of the bedroom, and he spent the next 6 hours wearing a path in the floorboards of the main room, listening to Zara's cries and feeling utterly helpless. Thomas arrived at some point, summoned by Mrs. Fletcher, and sat with Ryder through the long afternoon and into evening. "She's strong," Thomas said when Ryder's pacing became frantic. "She's got her mother's strength. She'll be all right." And she was. As the sun set behind the mountains, Zara gave birth to a son, small but healthy, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that proved themselves immediately. Sarah brought the baby out, wrapped in a soft blanket, and placed him in Ryder's arms. "You have a son," she said, smiling, "and your wife is asking for you." Ryder walked into the bedroom on shaky legs, the baby cradled carefully against his chest. Zara was propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, her hair damp with sweat and her eyes shining. "We have a son," Ryder said, his voice breaking. "We have a son," Zara agreed. "Let me see him." Ryder placed the baby in her arms, and they both just stared at this tiny person they'd made, this perfect combination of both of them. The baby yawned, opened his eyes briefly to reveal dark blue, and then settled against Zara's chest like he'd always belonged there. "What should we name him?" Zara asked softly. They'd discussed names but never settled on one, too superstitious to choose before the baby arrived. Now, looking at their son, Ryder knew exactly what felt right. "Joseph," he said. "After your mother's father, if that's all right with you." Zara's eyes filled with tears. "Joseph is perfect, Joseph Thomas Carson, for both our fathers." Thomas, who'd crept into the doorway to see his grandson, made a sound that was suspiciously like a sob. "You didn't have to do that," he said roughly. "Yes, we did," Zara said. "You're going to be a big part of his life, father. It's only right he carries your name." They spent the next few days in a happy bubble, just the 3 of them learning to be a family. Joseph was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in stretches long enough that Zara could rest. Ryder was absolutely besotted, spending hours just holding his son, talking to him in a soft voice, pointing out everything in their small cabin like Joseph could understand. Mrs. Fletcher and the other boarding house residents brought food and gifts, creating a steady stream of visitors that left them tired but loved. On the fifth day, reality intruded again. Ryder went into town to buy supplies and came back with news that made his jaw tight with anger. Gregory Lancaster had announced he was suing for ownership of the entire disputed vein, claiming Ryder's survey was fraudulent and had been paid for by Marcus Wheeler. It was a lie, but a public one, and it put Ryder's professional reputation in serious jeopardy. "He's trying to destroy me," Ryder said, showing Zara the notice that had been posted in the town hall. "If he can convince people I'm corrupt, I'll never work as a surveyor again." "Then we fight back," Zara said fiercely. She was sitting in their rocking chair, nursing Joseph, and the fierce protectiveness of new motherhood was radiating from her. "We don't let him win. You have your survey notes, your calculations. They speak for themselves." "In a fair fight, maybe," Ryder said. "But Lancaster has money and influence. He can afford lawyers and expert witnesses. I can't compete with that." "So we find another way," Zara insisted. "There's always another way." The another way came from an unexpected source. Marcus Wheeler, the owner of the Paradise Mine, showed up at their cabin 3 days later with a proposal. He wanted to hire Ryder to do a complete, independent survey of both mines, paid for equally by Wheeler, and by a consortium of smaller mine owners who were tired of Lancaster's bullying tactics. The survey would be submitted to a judge in Denver who had no ties to Georgetown, and the judge's ruling would be final. "It's a risk," Wheeler admitted. He was a straightforward man in his 40s, with honest eyes and a firm handshake. "Lancaster will fight it every step of the way. But if we can get an independent ruling, it sets a precedent. It shows that these disputes can be settled fairly, without whoever has the most money automatically winning." "Why me?" Ryder asked. "After everything that's happened, you still trust my work." "Because Lancaster is so desperate to discredit you," Wheeler said simply. "That tells me your survey was accurate. If you'd been bought, he'd be celebrating, not attacking you. Plus, I've looked at your previous work, talked to other people you've surveyed for. You have a reputation for honesty and accuracy. That's worth more than gold in this business." Ryder looked at Zara, who nodded encouragingly while bouncing Joseph on her shoulder. "Do it," she said. "Prove you were right." So Ryder took the job. He spent the next month doing the most thorough survey of his career, going into the depths of both mines, mapping every inch of the disputed vein, checking and rechecking his calculations. He brought in another surveyor from Denver as a second pair of eyes, making sure every measurement was witnessed and verified. Zara helped by organizing his notes, copying out his calculations in her neat hand, creating a document that was undeniable in its precision. Lancaster tried to interfere at every turn. He got an injunction preventing Ryder from entering the Lancaster mine, which was overturned by the Denver judge. He spread rumors about Ryder around town, trying to turn public opinion against him. He even tried to bribe Ryder directly, showing up at the cabin one evening with an offer of $5,000 to change his findings. "That's more money than you'll make in 5 years of surveying," Lancaster said, standing on their porch with a leather bag full of cash. "Take it. Tell the judge the vein belongs to me. No one has to know." "I'll know," Ryder said coldly, "and my wife will know. And someday my son will be old enough to ask what his father does for a living. I want to be able to tell him I'm a surveyor who tells the truth, not a surveyor who sells it to the highest bidder. You're a fool, Lancaster spat. An idealistic fool who's going to end up poor and broken because you're too stupid to take a good deal when it's offered. Maybe, Ryder agreed. But I'll be able to sleep at night. Can you say the same? Lancaster left in a fury, and Ryder watched him go with a sinking feeling that he'd just made a powerful enemy for life. But when he turned around, Zara was standing in the doorway with Joseph in her arms, and the look of pride on her face made everything worth it. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," Ryder replied. "Both of you, and I'm going to make sure you can be proud of me always." The final survey was submitted to the judge in late October, as the first snows were beginning to dust the high peaks. It was a massive document, hundreds of pages of measurements, calculations, maps, and photographs. The second surveyor, a respected man named Harrison who'd worked on railroad surveys across the West, submitted his own report that corroborated Ryder's findings completely. The judge took 2 weeks to review everything, and then issued his ruling. The vein ran beneath both properties almost exactly equally. The two mine owners would have equal claim and would be required to work together or sell the rights to a third party who would develop it properly. Neither owner got everything they wanted, but neither got nothing either. It was the fairest solution possible, and it became case law that would influence mining disputes for decades to come. Ryder's reputation was not only restored, but enhanced. The story of the surveyor who'd stood up to intimidation and bribery to tell the truth spread throughout Colorado's mining regions. Within weeks, he had job offers from 3 different mining companies and 2 railroad lines. He chose a railroad position that was based in Georgetown, doing survey work for a plan line through the mountains, because Zara didn't want to leave her father and their little cabin. Lancaster lost his case and a good portion of his fortune in legal fees. Worse, from his perspective, he lost face. Other mine owners who'd feared him saw that he could be beaten, that honesty and the law could triumph over money and intimidation. His power in Georgetown diminished, and eventually he sold his stake in the mine and moved to California, where no one knew about his defeat. Life settled into a new rhythm for the Carson family. Ryder's railroad work kept him busy, but not dangerously so, and it paid well enough that they could expand their cabin, adding 2 more rooms and a proper kitchen. Zara divided her time between caring for Joseph and helping her father at the boarding house, which was thriving thanks to Georgetown's continued silver boom. Joseph grew from a tiny infant into a robust baby, then a curious toddler. He had Ryder's dark hair and Zara's bright eyes, and he was fearless in the way only small children can be, climbing everything in reach and laughing with pure joy at the slightest provocation. Ryder said he'd gotten his mother's laugh, that same free, unrestrained sound that had captured Ryder's heart in the first place. On Joseph's 2nd birthday, as they celebrated with cake and presents in their expanded cabin, surrounded by friends from all over Georgetown, Zara announced she was pregnant again. This time there were no complications, no threats, just the happy anticipation of a growing family. The baby, a daughter they named Margaret Rose after both their mothers, arrived the following spring on a day when the wildflowers were blooming across the high meadows. The years rolled on, bringing both joy and challenge. Thomas grew older but stayed active, finally retiring from running the boarding house when Zara's 3rd child, another boy named Samuel, was born. The boarding house was sold to a young couple from Denver, and Thomas moved into a room in Ryder and Zara's cabin, which had expanded again to accommodate the growing family. Ryder's career flourished. He became the chief surveyor for the railroad line, overseeing a team of younger surveyors and earning a reputation as one of the finest in the West. He traveled sometimes, mapping routes through the mountains, but never for more than a few weeks at a time, always coming home to Zara and the children. Georgetown itself changed and evolved. The silver boom eventually slowed, though it never quite busted the way some towns did. The railroad line Ryder helped survey brought new commerce and made the town less isolated. Churches and schools multiplied. The lawless edge that had characterized the early mining days gave way to something more civilized, though the mountains and the wildness they represented were never far away. But through all the changes, some things remained constant. Every evening, no matter how busy the day had been, Ryder and Zara would find time to sit together, just the two of them, hand in hand. Sometimes they'd sit on their porch, watching the sun set behind the peaks. Sometimes they'd walk through town, greeting neighbors and friends. Sometimes, on cold winter nights, they'd sit by the fire while the children slept, talking about everything and nothing. And Zara still laughed, that same joyful sound that had captured Ryder's heart so many years ago in the dusty street of Georgetown. She laughed at his jokes, which never got any better but which he kept making anyway. She laughed at their children's antics, at Joseph's endless questions and Margaret's dramatic stories and Samuel's determined attempts to climb anything that stood still. She laughed at the absurdities of life, at unexpected moments of joy, at the simple pleasure of being alive and surrounded by people she loved. That laugh, Ryder would say sometimes, usually when they were alone and the children were asleep. That laugh is still my favorite sound in the world. You're going to make me cry if you keep saying things like that, Zara would reply, but she'd be smiling, that smile that was just for him. Then I'll keep saying it, Ryder would promise, because it's true. I fell in love with your laughter, but I stayed in love with your spirit, with everything you are. You're the strongest person I know, Zara Carson. And Zara would kiss him and think about that day so many years ago, when a clumsy cowboy had tumbled backward into a horse trough and changed her life forever. She'd been 20 years old and resigned to a life of quiet loneliness, running a boarding house and caring for her father. She'd never imagined the kind of love she'd found with Ryder, the kind that grew deeper and richer with every passing year. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ryder took Zara back to the spot where they'd first met, right there on the main street of Georgetown. The town had changed, the old buildings replaced or renovated, but the horse trough was still there, battered and worn but functional. "Should I fall in for old time's sake?" Ryder asked, grinning at her. "Don't you dare," Zara laughed. "You're 40 years old and the father of 3 children. Your days of falling into horse troughs are behind you. I don't know, I feel like I could still pull it off with dignity. There was no dignity the first time, and there won't be any this time either." "Fair point," Ryder conceded. He took both her hands, standing there in the street where their story had begun. 10 years. Can you believe it's been 10 years? Best 10 years of my life, Zara said honestly. Even with all the hard parts, all the scary parts, all the times I wanted to strangle you for making terrible jokes, I wouldn't change a single thing. Not even the part where I got beaten up by Lancaster's foreman. Well, maybe that part, Zara admitted. That was genuinely awful. But it led to you standing up for what was right, which led to your career taking off, which led to us being able to provide for our family. So even the bad parts served a purpose. Look at you, finding the silver lining, Ryder teased, but his eyes were serious and full of love. "I'm the luckiest man in Colorado, you know that." "I think you mean I'm the luckiest woman," Zara corrected. "How about we're both lucky?" Ryder suggested. Lucky we found each other. Lucky you laughed at my stupid joke. Lucky we were both brave enough to fall in love fast and get married quick and build this life together." "I'll accept that compromise," Zara said, and then she pulled him down for a kiss, right there on the main street of Georgetown where anyone could see. As they walked home hand in hand, passing the boarding house that had been her childhood home, passing the church where they'd married, passing all the familiar landmarks of their shared life, Zara felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. This was everything she'd never known she wanted. This love, this family, this life built with a man who made her laugh and held her when she cried and stood by his principles, even when it cost him. The children were waiting when they got home. Joseph, now 12 and already showing signs of becoming tall like his father. Margaret, 8, and full of opinions about everything. Samuel, 5, and convinced he could climb to the top of the tallest mountain if only his parents would let him try. Thomas was with them, reading from a book of adventure stories, and the cabin was warm and bright and smelled like the cookies Margaret had insisted on making as an anniversary surprise. "Did Papa fall in the horse trough again?" Joseph asked hopefully. "I'm afraid not," Zara said, laughing. "But he threatened to." "You should do it, Papa," Samuel said seriously. "I would like to see that." "Absolutely not," Margaret declared. "Mama would have to wash his clothes again, and she's already told me 3 times today that she has enough laundry as it is. When did you get so practical?" Ryder asked his daughter, ruffling her hair. "Someone in this family has to be," Margaret replied primly, which made everyone laugh. They ate the cookies and shared stories about the day. And later, after the children were in bed and Thomas had retired to his room, Ryder and Zara sat on their porch in the cool mountain night, wrapped in a shared blanket against the autumn chill. 3 children, Zara mused. "When I was 20 and single, I thought I'd never have any. Now I can't imagine life without them." "Should we try for 4?" Ryder asked, half joking. Zara considered it. She was 30 years old, healthy and strong, and the thought of another baby didn't frighten her the way it once might have. "Maybe," she said. "Let me think about it. Ask me again next year." "I'll hold you to that," Ryder promised. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. An owl called from somewhere in the trees behind the cabin, and the creek burbled its eternal song in the distance. "Ryder," Zara said softly, "thank you for falling into that horse trough." Ryder laughed, the sound warm and rich in the darkness. "Thank you for laughing when I did. I think that was the moment I knew." "Knew what?" "That you were the one. That you were going to change my life. I didn't know how yet, but I knew it was going to be you." "And was I?" Zara asked. "Did I change your life?" "Every single day," Ryder said, pulling her closer. "Every single day you make it better. You and the children and this life we've built, it's more than I ever dreamed I could have. I was just a wandering surveyor with no roots, no home, no real purpose beyond the next job. You gave me all of that. You gave me everything." "You gave me those things too," Zara said. "I thought I was going to spend my whole life in my father's shadow, useful but not really living. You taught me what it means to really live, to laugh freely, to love without holding back. You saw me, Ryder. The real me, not just the woman who could cook and clean, but the person underneath. And you loved that person." "I still do," Ryder said. "I always will." The years continued to pass, bringing both expected and unexpected changes. Joseph grew into a serious young man who inherited his father's talent for mathematics and his mother's strong moral compass. He went to college in Denver to study engineering, writing long letters home about his classes and his dreams of building bridges that would connect isolated mountain towns. Margaret proved to have a gift for music, playing the piano with a passion, and skill that amazed everyone. Samuel stayed fearless and adventurous, though he channeled it into more acceptable pursuits like rock climbing and exploring the high country. Thomas lived to see all 3 grandchildren grow up, passing peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73. His funeral was attended by half of Georgetown, a testament to the respect he'd earned over his decades in town. He was buried next to his wife in the cemetery on the hill overlooking the valley, and Zara planted wildflowers on both graves every spring. The 4th child Ryder had asked about did come, arriving when Zara was 32 and surprising them all. Another daughter, named Caroline after no one in particular, but just because they liked the name. She was a happy, easy baby who grew into an artistic child with a gift for drawing and painting the mountain landscapes that surrounded them. Ryder continued his surveying work well into his 50s, though he eventually transitioned into consulting, teaching younger surveyors the trade. He never lost his sense of humor, never stopped making terrible jokes, and never stopped looking at Zara like she was the most amazing thing he'd ever seen. His hair went gray, then white, and lines formed around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But his laugh stayed young and his love stayed constant. Zara's hair silvered too, and her hands grew rough from years of work, but her spirit never dimmed. She still found joy in small things, still laughed freely, still faced each challenge with determination and grace. She watched her children grow and leave and start families of their own, watched Georgetown evolve from a rough mining town into an established mountain community, watched the world change around her, while the things that truly mattered stayed the same. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren, 7 of them by then, gathered at the expanded cabin for a celebration. Joseph came from Denver with his wife and 3 children. Margaret traveled from Colorado Springs where she taught music, bringing her husband and twin daughters. Samuel, who'd become a guide leading wealthy tourists into the high country, brought his wife and baby son. Caroline, still unmarried at 22, arrived with paintings she'd made of the family home from different seasons. The party lasted all day and into the evening, with food and music and stories told and retold. The grandchildren played in the yard where their parents had played before them, climbing the same trees, running through the same creek. Ryder's old harmonica came out, and he played the songs he'd learned as a young man, while Margaret accompanied him on the piano they'd brought out onto the porch. 30 years, Ryder said in a toast, raising his glass. 30 years since I made the clumsy decision to fall backward into a horse trough, and you made the infinitely wiser decision to laugh at me. 30 years of love, laughter, challenges overcome, and joys shared. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Zara Carson, and I would live these 30 years over again in a heartbeat. Even the part where you got punched in the face, Joseph called out, grinning. Even that part, Ryder confirmed, because it led to good things. Everything led to good things, even the hard parts. Zara stood to reply, looking around at all these people who existed because she'd laughed at a wet cowboy's joke 3 decades ago. I wasn't looking for love when I met your father, she said, speaking to the room at large but looking at Ryder. I'd given up on it, actually. I thought I'd spend my life alone and I'd made peace with that. And then this ridiculous man fell into a horse trough and said the first thing that came into his head, and I laughed. Just laughed. And that laugh changed everything. It brought me love, yes, but more than that. It brought me life. Real, full, messy, beautiful life. So here's to laughter, and here's to love, and here's to being brave enough to grab happiness when it presents itself, even if it's soaking wet and slightly ridiculous. Everyone laughed and cheered, and the party continued late into the night. Ryder and Zara slipped away eventually, walking up the hill behind their cabin to watch the stars come out, just the two of them like they'd done countless times before. "You know what I realized today?" Zara said, her head resting on Ryder's shoulder. "What's that?" "We got our happily ever after. Not the fairy tale kind where everything's perfect, but the real kind. The kind with hard work and challenges and grief mixed in with the joy. The kind that's earned day by day, year by year. The kind that's built by two people who decided to love each other and keep choosing that love even when things got difficult." "That's the best kind of happily ever after," Ryder agreed. "The kind that's real." They stood there for a long time, listening to the laughter and music drifting up from the cabin below, surrounded by the mountains that had witnessed their entire story, under the same stars that had shone on them that first night when Ryder had proposed in a rush of relief at still being alive. They were older now, their bodies bearing the marks of time and work and the raising of 4 children, but the essential truth between them had never changed. "I love you," Zara said, words she'd said thousands of times but which never lost their meaning. "I love you too," Ryder replied. Still, always, forever. Years later, when they were both in their 70s and Georgetown had evolved yet again with automobiles replacing horses on the streets and electric lights replacing lanterns, people would sometimes ask them about their marriage. How had it lasted so long? What was their secret? And Ryder would smile and say, "I fell in a horse trough," and Zara would laugh, that same free, joyful laugh she'd had at 20, and add, "And I laughed at him." And somehow that answer, as simple as it was, seemed to capture everything that mattered. The willingness to find humor in accidents, to see the person behind the pratfall, to recognize something special when it appeared even if it was soaking wet and somewhat bedraggled. The courage to love quickly and fully, to commit without holding back, to build a life together brick by brick, day by day, choice by choice. They raised 4 children to adulthood, watched them marry and have children of their own. They saw Georgetown transform from a silver mining town to a mountain resort town as the 20th century brought new industries and new people. They weathered economic downturns and personal tragedies, celebrated triumphs both large and small, and through it all, they remained devoted to each other in a way that made younger couples look at them with a mixture of envy and inspiration. The old horse trough where it all began was eventually removed from the main street, replaced by a modern fountain. But everyone in Georgetown knew the story, and the fountain became a gathering place for couples, a symbol of how love could begin in the most unexpected ways. There was even a plaque, placed there by their children on Ryder and Zara's 50th anniversary, that read, "Here, in July 1882, Ryder Carson fell into a horse trough and found his life's purpose. May we all be so lucky in our accidents." Ryder passed first at the age of 81, quietly in his sleep one winter morning. He'd lived a full life, exactly the kind of life he'd wanted, and his last words to Zara the evening before were, "I love your laugh. I'll love it forever." Zara lived 3 more years without him, though part of her was gone the day he died. Their children and grandchildren rallied around her, filling her days with visits and stories, and the continuing chaos of family life. She taught her grandchildren to make bread, to find joy in simple things, to laugh freely. She told them stories about their grandfather, about his terrible jokes and his unshakable integrity, about how he'd fallen into a horse trough and won her heart in the same moment. When Zara passed at 84, surrounded by family in the same cabin where she'd spent most of her life, her last conscious thoughts were of that hot July day in 1882. She could see it so clearly, the dusty street, the cowboy flailing in the water trough, the look on his face when she laughed. The way everything had changed in that single moment. The way one choice to laugh instead of walking away had led to 53 years of marriage, 4 children, 14 grandchildren, and more joy than she'd ever imagined possible. She was buried next to Ryder on the hill overlooking Georgetown. Their matching headstones simple but perfect. Ryder Thomas Carson, 1856–1937. He fell and found his purpose. Zara Margaret Carson, 1862–1946. She laughed and found her joy. Their story became part of Georgetown's history, told and retold to newcomers and tourists. The boarding house that Thomas had run was eventually converted into a museum, with one room dedicated to the Carson family and their role in the town's development. Ryder's surveys, precise and detailed, were displayed as examples of the technical skill that had built the West. Zara's recipes became favorites at the local restaurants. Their children and grandchildren spread across Colorado and beyond, carrying forward the lessons they'd learned about love, integrity, and finding joy in unexpected places. But perhaps their truest legacy was simpler than all of that. It was in the couples who chose to marry quickly when they found the right person, taking a leap of faith just like Ryder and Zara had. It was in the people who chose honesty over money, integrity over convenience, because they'd heard the story of a surveyor who'd stood up to a powerful mine owner. It was in the laughter that rang through Georgetown streets, in people who chose joy over despair, humor over seriousness, love over loneliness. The story of the clumsy cowboy and the woman who laughed at his joke became a reminder that the best things in life often begin with accidents, with moments of grace in the midst of chaos, with the courage to recognize something special even when it's soaking wet and slightly ridiculous. It became a story about finding love in unexpected places, about building a life on a foundation of laughter and integrity, about the kind of devotion that weathers decades and only grows stronger. And on summer evenings, when the sun sets behind the mountains and the last light paints the valley gold, people walking past the fountain in Georgetown's main square sometimes stop and smile, thinking about that long-ago July day when a cowboy fell into a horse trough and everything changed. They think about Ryder's earnest, wet face and terrible joke, about Zara's free, joyful laugh echoing down the street, about how a single moment of spontaneous joy can ripple outward for generations. The story lived on, as the best love stories always do, in the hearts and memories of everyone who heard it. It lived on in Georgetown itself, in the streets and buildings that Ryder and Zara had walked through together for more than 50 years. It lived on in their descendants, in the way they chose to live their own lives with integrity and joy. And it lived on in the simple truth at its heart, that love, real and lasting love, can begin in an instant and last forever, if you're brave enough to laugh at a clumsy joke and wise enough to see the soul behind it.